Tom is back, and we'll give a microphone to Tom. Thank you.
Sure, you can come up here.
Stand by your dad. That's the title for a song.
There they are. This is Henry. He's 5. So 30 years ago, it was 1987, Iran-Contra. Reagan said, "Gorbachev, take down this wall." Bon Jovi sang, "Living in a Prayer." Stuff like that, if you remember. I was 22. I was a physics undergrad. And I was interested in the interpretations of quantum physics, and I met up with Amit Goswami at the University of Oregon, and I took a seminar with him. And we met weekly and talked about philosophical implications of quantum theory. And after a couple months of that, he said to the three of us, "Why don't you come over to my house next week, and I have this mystic I want you to meet." And I thought, well, that's pretty interesting. This guy's from India, and I figured, there's some kind of Swami there. It'd be pretty interesting. So I show up, and here's Joel. And here's this guy drinking a beer and smoking a cigarette, talking with a New York accent. And I'm like, wait a minute, this is the mystic? So anyway, it was a great evening. We sat around, we talked about, sounds familiar after all these years still, how all the mystics say the same thing, and how science and religion can be harmonized, and how meditation helps us realize this transcendent truth and things like that. So some things never change. I was told that there are these little Sunday meetings that happen at Amit's house too. So I started coming to those, and this was in May 1987. And he must have packed his house with maybe 6 people on average. And there's also I think it was Wednesday night workshop where Joel would hand out these sheets of paper, and they had these quotes from the mystics, and the mystics weren't identified. And terms like Allah were genericized to just God or something like that, and Brahman were genericized. And we'd read down this list, and it was like, so, which tradition is this from? And we were all scratching our heads saying, well, I don't know. That was the point, of course, was that you can't really tell the difference without clues like culturally dependent words like Brahman or Allah or something like that. So came to these meetings, and I think it was after just a couple of weeks, there was a potluck celebration of the founding of the Center for Sacred Sciences. And showed up to that, and Joel gave a talk about how the center is all about the common testimony of all the mystics, and forming a new sacred worldview, and I guess help fostering a community of spiritual seekers. And it seems to have lasted, so, to the benefit of many, many people. So it's very heartening to see that it's grown and it's benefited so many people. Back then, there weren't any 5 fundamentals or 10 selfless precepts or anything like that. But I did go on I think Joel's first retreat in Lone Pine that summer with Amit and Maggie and Andrea and a woman named Sydney. And we were there, just a few of us, and for 4 days. And each day we focused on, I think it was the first day was something called attention. And the second day was, I think, Commitment, that's right. And then detachment, and then surrender. So the 4 principles of the path were right there at the very beginning, the theme of the first retreat, really. Lots of interesting meditations. Some of them that I don't recall ever having been repeated since then. Lots of forms arose in the beginning, and not all of them stuck through the years. A lot of the good ones did, so they stood the test of time. But there were some interesting ones. I was looking through my journal, and there was one where we were like meditating on the meaning of music and things like this. Joel's coming up with a lot of very interesting creative stuff back then. Seeing what sticks, what works for people, and. So it was a great time for me, and planting lots of seeds for the future. One interesting thing in the early years there that I wasn't myself part of was that mostly I think one of the forms that arose mostly from I think Amit's initiative was that he was from India and he wanted a real guru, and Joel kind of went along with that, and so some of the students became official disciples and had these necklaces, and Joel had a necklace that matched them and stuff, and that was one of the things that didn't really work out. Dropped away fairly quickly. Now everyone's just students. Yeah, it was great to be a part of the center back then, and to still be part of it today. So, thanks. That's all I have to share tonight.
Yes. Can you hear me without this microphone? No? Okay.
Yeah?
No, well, I think maybe you need it. Anyway, it's amazing to see you all here. Every time I come here and see all these people still coming back, I'm amazed. It's always fresh. I really want to say just one thing here, and that is I never intended this. I didn't have any vision. I didn't get tablets on the mountaintop, or anything like that. After my awakening, I had no intention whatsoever of teaching because I just didn't believe it could be taught. I thought it was complete grace. And the only thing that happened is after about a month or so, I was still driving around in my little pilgrimage, and I got this tremendous urge to write this stuff down, to write what happened down. I thought, well, the least you could do is at least bear witness that this is possible. If it can happen to a jerk like me, it can happen to anybody, So I pulled off the road and I checked into a motel for 3 days, and I came up with this 25-page document or something, and then I went on. And I finished my little video project, the Here and Now newsletter, and I was heading home, and this urge kept stuck with me. Said, you need to do a book, not just one, like 25-page essay or something. You need to do a book. So I started thinking in my mind, gee, if I found a cabin in the mountains or something, maybe I would, write a book. Well, serendipitously, I stopped at Dr. Wolf's place on the way back to Los Angeles, and there was someone who had a cabin who wanted to rent it, and so I rented and moved in. All this happened this way. And still I had no intention of being a teacher. I thought, well, I'll write the book, and I'll be done with it, And I actually put in an application to the U.S. Post Office to get a job up there, and I thought I'll just spend the rest of my life in bliss in the mountains here, and it'll be wonderful, Well, Andrea started asking me questions, and I had no reason not to start answering her questions. And then she drafted me to help Dr. Wolf communicate with the visitors who came to see him. By the way, if you don't know, Dr. Wolf was a 95-year-old mystic philosopher who lived in Lone Pine, California. This is where I ended up. There's a picture of the house, or the original house on the property on this table here. Anyway, so people started asking me questions, and Amit and Maggie, Amit was a professor, as Tom said, at the U of O, and Maggie was his wife. They came down to visit Dr. Wolf, not to see me, but Andrea put them together with me, and we started talking. I knew nothing about physics, but I got very interested in quantum mechanics through talking to him. And then I moved to LA, and I started working at the Bodhi Tree bookstore, and Ahmed and Maggie came back and they said, look, we can't afford to come down to LA every time we want to see you. Why don't you, you're just working in a bookstore, why don't you come up to Eugene and we'll start a center and all that. I had never heard of Eugene, really. I'm a city kid. I grew up in New York City. I never heard of Eugene. The last thing in my life I ever imagined would to end up here, in the boondocks. Anyway, again, I couldn't say no. I had no reason to say no, so I came. And just as Tom said, Ahmed started inviting people over to the house, and it started growing like that. And even things like the 10 selfless precepts, like Tom said in the beginning, they weren't there. We actually had a different version of the 10 selfless precepts. People wanted to practice precepts, and we wrote a more, everybody said, we don't want all this negative stuff. Don't do this and don't do that. They don't want no 10 commandments and all that. So everything was positive, be loving, be kind, all that. But you know what? They were very hard to practice. We practiced that for about 6 months. And it's hard to remember that. It's easy to remember don't do that because you're conditioned to do it. So you're going to lie and then, oh, don't do that. So we went back to the more old style set of precepts. If you notice our precepts, we tried to balance it so there's negative and positive. So don't do this, but do this and whatnot. Anyway, the point is it all grew out of you, not me. From the very beginning was people asking me, and the whole center's grown that way. And today it continues to grow that way. So it's not like I had some vision. You had the vision. Maybe you didn't know it, but here it is. That's why we're here. And we can make plans for the future. I'm not against that. It would be nice someday to have our own retreat center, for instance. We're still trying to find places to go and whatnot. That's a big project, a lot of money, but if enough people are around to make it worthwhile, maybe we'll do it. But I just really appreciate so much the fact it's grown organically. Just came out of our own experience and continues that way. And I hope it does for the rest of the time that it's useful to people. Thank you very much.
Interlude. Well, I think it's my turn. It's very good to be here. See a lot of old friends here gathered. It's great to see you all. Okay. Thank you. So, Fred called me a little while ago and asked me if I'd be willing to say a few words, being one of the old-timers from the center. And I said, sure, be delighted to. I mean, why not? And as soon as I hung up the phone, it's like, what am I gonna say? Frankly, I don't spend time thinking about the past. I've been on a different journey for the last 17 years, and so there's a lot of new faces here that I don't know, and that you don't know me. I was privileged to be a member of the board of directors from about 88 until 99. And Joel, I think, is a bit too modest because all that happened in the center, we were working together, but it was Joel's vision and Joel's integrity and Joel's purity of intent that drove us all. And it was really a privilege to be part of that. But as I was going over memories and dragging out photographs and checking dates and stuff like that, I realized that wasn't me. It was just surface level stuff, and I didn't find it of any interest. And so I'm thinking, what do I have to share that would be of some interest. I asked a good friend of mine, what would you think as a newer member of the center, what would be of interest to talk about the early days? And she said to me, well, you could talk about the elephant in the room. And I said, oh, what elephant? And she was talking about the fact that I'm not a member of the center at this point. And of course, if you were part of the center community in 1998, 1999, there is no elephant because my journey was shared with all of you at that time. And with foundation class and classes on, what had happened was I met my partner Landriel, and she is the scribe of something that we call the HP writings, a guidance from spirit, source, whatever you want to call it, the higher power. And so I became involved in that because I immediately felt a deep resonance and a deep calling to work with it. There was a depth to it that was new to me. And so the last year or so I was at the center, I shared that as best I could, but my journey was taking me in my own direction. And so I am the only one here reflecting that has an 18-year or 17-year gap. And so what occurred to me was, what's my impression 18 years on, 17 years on? Was this a good thing? And I have to tell you, it was a very, very good thing. And I felt that I couldn't imagine a better preparation for the work that I was to do over these last 20 years than everything that was offered and given to me at the center. And there were three parts particularly. And one thing about the center that I think is pretty unique is it's a community of practitioners. We take this a little more seriously than just going to church on Sunday and hearing the preacher say something and having a little inspiration and calling it good. There's an opportunity here to delve deeper into the teachings and into our own laboratory of consciousness, as Joel would put it. And so that preparation was absolutely essential to me. I look back and you think about a job you may have had, or you got a college degree or something like that, and none of those things were of relative importance to me. But I look back on my time at the center and my time with Joel, and what an incredible, precious gift. It made the whole rest of my journey possible. And the three main parts of that, of course, most importantly, was Joel. Joel, my teacher, and Joel, my friend, and he shared everything that he had. And there was a great richness there, not only in his teachings, but in who he was, his integrity, his selflessness, and his intelligence and his perspective most of all. And even beyond the formal teachings, just working with him, knowing him as a friend, constantly that perspective beyond the limited self, beyond the delusion of the ego, would be a wonderfully refreshing perspective. And so the opportunity to get to know and interact with those who have dropped the burden of ego, very, very precious. And my time with Joel, the most precious. And even if we don't cross paths that often, we'll always be the best of friends. And then the other thing, the second part of my journey that the center helped so much was Jennifer's project, the library, which I started in the center early in '88, and I think the library was already going at Maggie's, right? Yes, very, very modest beginnings, and boy, has it grown. It's still going strong, I take it? Oh, but what a tremendous resource to have gathered in one place the writings of the mystics of so many traditions going back hundreds, even thousands of years, and having it curated to some extent. In other words, not trying to find a needle in a haystack, not going to the public library and saying, well, who's worth reading? And so the library has been an amazing thing, and to read those mystics planted seeds, and maybe they came out and sprouted and put a little root down in the next meditation, or a month later or a year later. But all of these seeds, when they sprouted, formed this, if you can imagine, a mass of growth, and it's like a solid foundation based on the commonalities of all of these mystics and the different traditions, as well as the individual expression of those mystics. I mean, what a wonderful thing. Every one of them was unique. And so that was the second most important gift. And then the third was the practice. None of it means anything if it's just words. But at the center, we practice meditation, we practice precepts, we have the opportunity to go on retreats. Precious, precious opportunities. And as Joel says, the laboratory of consciousness, that is something that we all have. Nobody is without that laboratory. And yet, you can send anybody into a laboratory, and if they don't know how to use the tools, if they haven't practiced with them, it means nothing. And so it all came together as just the most precious opportunity. And so looking back over these years, I really wanted to appreciate that, because it is precious. I don't know of any other group that's doing quite this thing. And I see it carries on. I think a lot of the forms that are still part of the center were developed in that first 10 or 12 years. And whatever was of worth in that, I think, has continued, and whatever wasn't quite so good, as Tom was saying, dropped away. And I'm sure with all the creative energy that all of you have brought, there's probably new and more wonderful things that have come to be. And so, all I have to say is, in hindsight, and frankly, I wondered when it was time to be parting ways. I was pretty integrated with the center. I was, as I say, a member of the board and a minister and teaching the foundation groups. What's that?
Didn't you do the newsletter too?
Oh, and the newsletter, so anyway, nobody's irreplaceable. But I thought, well, this is going to give Joel, it's maybe a little bit of a shock, but, it was just as I would have expected. He wished me the very best on my journey. There was no stickiness. This is not a cult, people.
No kidding.
So I think that's about all I have to say, is to appreciate what a precious opportunity we've all been given here, and that we're all part of, and bringing our energies to, and to whatever extent you're called to the mystic's journey, what a tremendous foundation is available here wherever Spirit calls you ultimately. Thank you.
So just a little plug here for the raffle basket, which is sitting over on that table. If you haven't looked at it, you should. There's some amazing, wonderful stuff in it, all kinds of homemade food and produce, and I think I even saw some kind of salmon thing or something. And then all kinds of other stuff that you will totally enjoy. So take a look at it, and then while you're over there, buy a few tickets. They're $2 each, or 3 for $5. Just write your name on the ticket and stick it in the jar. Put the money in the other jar. Right now, there's not that many tickets in there, so the people who have bought tickets have really good odds. But we'd really rather make more money for the building fund, so buy some tickets and take a look. Thanks.
Thank you, Mora. Good evening, everyone. Good to see everybody here.
Yay, Fred.
Power to the people.
It was. Thank you for barbecuing.
Thank you. I was asked to read, Andrea Pucci wrote a few reflections. She was actually Joel's first teacher. He mentioned her, student. Right? She was a student teacher, right? She was
Dr. Wolf's caregiver, I didn't mention that.
Yeah, she was Dr. Wolf's caregiver, and so she was working there when Joel stopped by. And so she started asking him questions, and he had said that this place wouldn't exist if she hadn't first started asking questions, so you can either thank her or blame her for the results. So anyway, this is what she had to say. At Dr. Wolf's home in Lone Pine, Joel was a natural teacher, exuding warmth and enthusiasm in response to any interest and spiritual self-inquiry from any of Dr. Wolf's visitors. It was a good time for Joel to get a feel for the role of spiritual guide. His stories were humorous, colorful, entertaining, and he was generous with his attention and time. In retrospect, it seems as though there was an organic emergence of encouragement and support from certain people, such as Dr. Wolf, Ahmet, and Maggie. That brought about the establishment of the Center for Sacred Sciences. In Eugene, it had a life of its own, and many wonderful and devoted students stepped in to support Joel's inspired teachings. So it continues to this very day, with the mystical lineage blood flowing through like a great vital stream of compassion, wisdom, and power. It is forever ancient while simultaneously new, adapting as needed, attracting seekers of old into timeless awareness of sacred now. CSS is a refuge and a call to unity, diversity, and peace, so very needed in these troubled times of confusion and suffering. My warm regards to everyone, Andrea.
Hi, everyone. I'm Todd. I'm going to read a little something that Maggie wrote. Maggie and Amit formed the center with Joel, and she had some nice words here. But before I read that, I just wanted to say that I came to the center in '94, I think. Is that right, Fred? 1994. Well, Fred was already here. You were already at the center, and Gene was at the center, and I think Carol Ann was at the center. Carol Ann, yeah. And
I was at the center too. Man, I met Amit.
you did? Oh,
I've forgotten.
Barb was here. Oh yeah, Barb was here. Yeah, anybody else that I'm missing here? This was 1994. So when I started coming, I actually came to the library. I'd heard stories about this Center for Sacred Sciences, and I was a little skeptical. You know, I was a nurse. I worked in the intensive care unit, and I was rather, new to this kind of stuff, and it looked like a cult to me. And so I would come by. They were living on Fillmore Street at the time, and I would come by, but I never went to the talks. It looked a little bit, I don't know, I thought it was a little funny. But I really liked the library, so I was checking out, I was doing a lot of practice. I was going to Vipassana retreats and sort of having my own little thing. I had a Sunday meeting where I did Vipassana with a group. And one day I was in the library and I was looking for something very specific. I'm not sure exactly what it was, but I believe it was something around the topic of emptiness. And so I checked out some stuff, and then I asked Jennifer if she had any suggestions, and she said, well, how about this tape? This tape might help you. And I looked at it, and it was Joel. And I kind of humored her. I had some other stuff. I checked out some other tapes, and I got this one. And I worked at the hospital. It's about a 40-minute drive every day. And so I would listen to the talks, the different talks on my way to work and on my way home. I would just put on the tape. And anyway, by the time the week had almost gone by, I had finished all of the tapes, and I had this one left, the Joel tape. And I thought, well, okay, I'll just listen to this. So I put it in, and I was just blown away. It totally answered a whole lot of questions that I'd had that I'd been reading. I'd been digging through all of these texts to try to find something that would get to the bottom of these things. And it totally opened the whole spectrum for me. So then I was there the following Sunday, and I continued to come ever since. So, and that was 1994, and I was living down in Roseburg, so it was a commute for me. It was actually quite a ways to go. But it was totally worth it the whole time. I really, really appreciated the whole thing. So it was quite beautiful. So anyway, I just wanted to get that little background there. So here are Maggie's comments. Could you hand me my glasses out of that? Sure. There. Okay. All right, here's what she said. After meeting Joel at Dr. Wolf's ranch in Lone Pine, California, and visiting him several times while he worked at the Bodhi Tree bookstore in LA, the Center for Sacred Sciences was formed out of a meeting in California between Amit, Joel, and myself. During our discussions, we realized that the new physics called quantum mechanics was compatible with spirituality. This led us to invite Joel to move to Eugene to teach meditation and establish a spiritual center with Amit and myself. In March of 1987, we elected the Board of Guardians of the Network, and that's what the center was called originally, is that right? It was called the Guardians of the Network.
It was different people were on that board, and they passed it off to us, basically.
I see, so this was something that already existed.
Had been existing for a while, yes.
Guardians of the Network. So you guys formed a board, your own board.
They had a board, but they didn't want the organization anymore. It was Marilyn George. And so they said, oh, you're going to set up an organization? Don't set up an organization, take ours. Okay. So they elected us to the board and they resigned.
Okay. All right.
Already planted.
Oh, yes, and it says here, an existing nonprofit organization. And it was formed with Amit serving as vice president, Joel serving as president, and myself as secretary and treasurer. We held our first board meeting as newly elected board members on April 1st, 1987, where we changed the name to the Center for Sacred Sciences. At that time, Amit and I lived in a blue house at 5405 Donald Street. The house had 3 levels. The lower level had a bed and bath for Joel and a large family room where we began holding meetings. Meetings and refreshments afterwards would flow up into the living room on the main level, and Amit and I had a bedroom and office on the top level. In addition to serving as board secretary and treasurer for the first 6 months, and treasurer for several years, and performing some organizational activities, I was personally involved with developing a mailing list, the first CSS newsletter, developing our membership structure, designing our first logo, and rewriting the center charter and bylaws, and setting up a publishing fund, which published Joel's first book, Naked Through the Gate, in fall of 1988, followed by a second printing in the spring of 1990. Is that right?
Sounds right.
Sounds good. Okay. Not a checker, you know. As time passed, the people attending became more interested in spirituality than science. And Amit withdrew from CSS, and I continued to serve as board treasurer until September of 1990. I was delighted to know Joel and felt that time with him to be some of the best time of my life.
We did it, yes.